everyone, welcome to Communication 101. The purpose today is to talk about some general information regarding communication here at Elam. Some of the topics that we're going to cover today might be information that you already know, but as you begin your journey here, we want to refocus everyone's attention on the ways that our students communicate. Communication is one of the greatest gifts that we have been given by God. It's so easy to get caught up in the world in the busy days of Elam, and sometimes we miss the thousands of communication moments that occur each day. It is these wonderful moments that help us build relationships and foundations of trust with our students. We also want to keep in mind that our students are going to communicate differently, and this varies from student to student, and there's no right or wrong, but it's a learning experience for everyone. Our students here at Elam communicate in numerous ways, and it's truly amazing to watch. Some of our students use eye gaze, object manipulation, single word utterances, communication devices, and body language. So a lot of our kiddos who have a lack of fine motor ability, maybe they're utilizing a wheelchair, those are some students who you might see using eye gaze systems. Object manipulation could be also some students who don't have the best fine motor abilities at the current moment. So they're using maybe an object board, they're selecting the objects that they are associating certain words with. Some of our students have used communication devices with a certain toy on there, or maybe a spoon or a cup or a toilet to really get those crucial communication elements across to the communication partner. And they might be at that object stage, and eventually we're going to try to fade those and move them to possibly a communication book or a communication device. Some of our students are using single word utterances, like I mentioned before. For the students who are using these single word utterances, they might be communicating just fine, but we're always going to look for ways to increase their utterances or increase that functional communication. Other students might be utilizing communication devices. These devices vary from low-tech, which might be a device with vocal output, but it only has 4 buttons. And another student may be using a dedicated device, which costs about $10,000, and they have thousands and thousands of words. And it's a static screen. So you hit one button, it's going to link to another one. Another student might be using body language. They might be at the stage where they're pointing and they're grabbing, and they are vocalizing, maybe not a word, but some sort of sound, and they're really using their body language to get across what they're trying to communicate. Our students learn effective communication by spending all day, every day with people who together support, encourage, and stretch communication skills. We can help our students at Elam grow their communication skills by supporting communication, encouraging communication, stretching communication, and reporting communication. So let's go through these one by one. So when we say supporting communication, what this truly means is making sure that the student has what they need to communicate their wants and needs all day, every day. A lot of times our staff maybe will forget a communication device or don't think that the student knows how to use the communication device effectively. And maybe they're at the stage where they're not independently using that communication device, but having that in front of the student and teaching them is supporting them in their communication. And that's what we need to be sure to remember day in and day out, is we have to make sure that we are teaching our students how to communicate, so when they're not with us anymore, they have the ability to do so. The next one is encouraging communication. A lot of times people have preconceived notions of, oh, well, my students are nonverbal, so I can't talk to them because they can't answer me back, which is entirely false. Our students know exactly what you're communicating to them verbally, and it might not be their language, but that's why we can also model on their device to encourage that communication. It's showing that support and that bond and that understanding that, hey, I can use your device just as well as you can, and maybe we can communicate this way. When we say stretching communication, this means stretching the utterances. So if we do have those kiddos who are at 1, 2-word utterances, let's make full sentences. Let's allow them to hear those full sentences and give them that language. And maybe one day they'll start building on their 2-word utterances, those 1-word utterances. But we need to give them that ability to stretch that and expand their current language. And last but not least, we want to report communication. There are a lot of instances where the speech pathologist only gets to spend about an hour or two with our students each week because there's a few kids on their caseload. And so the speech path is not around at all times. So we want to be sure that if something awesome happens, if they're expanding their utterances, if they said something totally off the wall that you've never heard them say before, we want to let the speech path know so that we all have the same understanding that our student is growing their language and their independence. So we're going to talk a little bit about s'mores and not necessarily the food, even though we have that delicious picture on here. But we want to talk about facilitating effective communication. So what s'mores stands for is slow rate, model, respect and reflect, repeat, expand, and stop. So we're going to go down one by one and just walk through these. And the first one is going to be a slow rate. So we want to make sure that we speak in a slow, articulated manner. A lot of our students with autism and other developmental disabilities do process things in their brain a little bit slower. It's about 13 seconds compared to a typically developing individual. So we want to make sure that we give them time to process what we're saying before we say it again and again and jumble everything that they've already heard up. So make sure that we're speaking in a slow rate for our students. Next, we want to model. We want to say words and phrases that are related to the contextual information that's available while pointing to pictures on the child's device or communication board. We call this parallel talk. It's what the student is doing as he or she is doing it, and self-talk, talking about what you're doing as you're doing it. They're both really helpful tools for modeling communication and language, and we can do this either verbally or on a communication device. We want to think about modeling as providing the color commentary for ongoing classroom activities. A lot of times I'm thinking about in speech group sessions and pull-out speech sessions, anything else that you might be engaging with a student, we want to say, for example, I need the glue, please. Give them the glue. Put on. You're just going to model what they're doing so that we give them the language and explain what we're doing, and we're explaining the verbal ability and things that we can say or the student can say during the specific moments, and we're really learning in the moment. And eventually our students are going to learn to generalize those skills once we model enough for them. Next, we're going to talk about respecting and reflecting. What this means is we're going to provide the words to code the child's wants, feelings, and intended messages. So when the child communicates something through a gesture or word approximation, we're going to model a word or phrase to communicate the same thought or feeling without making the child repeat him or herself. For example, say you're walking through the hallway and your student points to a water fountain. You, as the one-on-one, you might say, drink, I want drink. You want to give the student the ability to hear how they can appropriately request what they're seeking at that moment. And while we want to honor them and the fact that they are making a gesture, and you know exactly what they want, you still want to teach them the verbal way to request what they want. And when I say verbal, it can either be verbal language or any sort of verbal output from a communication device, from their object board. Just you're speaking into their language in terms of making them request what they want. The next one is repeat. So we want to frequently repeat utterances. So when you are working with a student and say it's the water fountain example, you can say drink. I want drink. Drink, please. You want to repeat that over and over so that their brain has time to access and really absorb what they're supposed to be saying if they want to access that object. And the more frequently that you repeat those utterances, the more likely the student is to actually take that back and be able to use that in the future. So when we're expanding our language, we want to repeat and rephrase, building upon our own single word utterances by adding one or two more words to provide a more complete phrase or sentence. So you can build on the student's communication as well. So if they're at that one word level and they're saying bubble, bubble, or on their device they're hitting the button that says bubble, try to expand the comment to 2 words. So you might say, yeah, that's a big bubble, cool bubble. Anything like that to expand their utterance. And this goes along with typical development of language. As a baby is growing up and learning that language, they might be pointing at a dog and you're stating for them, "Oh, furry dog, dog is barking." It's the same thing with our students with communication devices. And last but not least, we want to stop. We want to provide an expectant pause to allow the child time to respond. Like I said back with the processing comment, our students need accurate time in order to process what you're requesting from them or saying to them. So after we give a directive or ask a question, we don't want to continuously ask them, "How are you? How are you? How are you?" Because every time you say that after the initial question, it's going to reset them back and it's going to take them even longer to respond. So we want to make sure that we're providing an expectant pause. So we might say, "How are you?" And then we're going to count to about 10 to 13 seconds in our head. And after that, if there's still no response, then you can go ahead and ask that again. And honestly, waiting that 10 to 13 seconds seems like forever in that situation, but that's when you're going to get the best response from the student that you're working with by allowing them to independently respond. So now we're going to talk about the WAIT strategy. And WAIT stands for, why am I talking? And this really goes into what I was just describing with resetting the initial question or demand that you're placing on the student by talking too much. And we really want to ask ourselves, why am I talking in this moment? Why are we giving more verbal input to a child who's processing a little bit slower and already isn't giving us that answer that we're looking for? So we want to take a step back and ask ourselves, why am I talking? And then allow the student that independence to answer the question or provide some sort of input from the demand that you're placing on them. All right, so now we're going to go into OWL, which stands for observe, wait, and look and listen. So a perfect example of this is the water fountain example. A lot of times our students will look at something and we'll say, "Oh, it looks like you want water. Oh, here's your water bottle. You look thirsty," without giving them the opportunity to use their language and use their skills of communication to ask for what they want. So the way that I like to think of it, there are plenty of students that I've worked with at Elam where I know their favorite toy, I know their favorite drink, I know exactly the first thing they're going to eat during lunch, but I'm not going to jump in there and answer for them because once they leave us and they leave Elam, there's not always going to be somebody that knows the ins and outs of all of their favorite toys, all of their favorite foods. So we really need to give them the opportunity to seek this out on their own and communicate independently. So during a situation, say like lunch, we want to observe the situation. We're going to pay attention to what they're doing, but we're not necessarily going to open their lunchbox for them. We're not necessarily going to open their juice box for them. We're going to take a step back and wait, and we're going to see if they maybe ask us to help them open their juice or ask us to help them open their lunchbox. So again, creating those opportunities where they can independently communicate and use their skills. So once you guys are in the classroom at Elam, you're really going to notice all of the visual symbols and just visual everything that we have for our students to support them. So also looking at language, we want to make language visual. So some of the tools that we use to make language visual here at Elam are pictures. A lot of students are using communication boards strictly for communication requesting. A lot of pictures are used to match locations. So a student might have a visual schedule. So they take the picture off of their visual schedule. They go to the location they're supposed to be going to. So say, for this example, it's the gym. And then they match the icon to the gym door. Another example, like I was just speaking of, is the visual schedules. Some of our students need the picture of the concrete location to be able to understand where they're going next on their schedule. Some students have a schedule located in the classroom, a Velcro schedule on the wall. Some students carry a schedule with them that's just words. It really depends on the student's ability. We also like to use number strips, which you guys will see a lot throughout Elam. The number strips help students visualize how many turns they have left. This is particularly helpful if a student is working on a task that isn't necessarily their favorite, and we get to tell them, we really see you're not enjoying this task, and I understand and I hear you, but you only have 2 turns left, and then you can work for your favorite toy. So it's just a visual way for them to see I have 2 turns left and then to see what they're working for. Another visual that we use is a first then strip. This also goes into when a student is having a hard time, maybe working on a task that's not preferred, then we can say, okay, first you do work, then you can go to recess, or first you have work, then you can go to the leisure room. So a communication board, like we spoke of, has all the visual icons on it. We also have visual rules, which are typically on top of the token board or token economy system that our students do use. So the token boards are actually, you give tokens depending on the student following the rules that are located on top of their communication or on their token boards. So this might be having safe hands, listening to teachers, following rules, anything that the behavior team puts in a plan, or any behavioral concerns that the student may be working on at that time. So the rules are clearly stated on top of the token board, and the tokens are actually Velcroed on the front of the board so the student can see how many they have left until they earn the preferred item. Some of our students who do have maybe higher language abilities, they utilize conversation starters. So these conversation starters are not necessarily a communication book, a communication system. It just gives the first 2 or 3 words into how to start a conversation, how to ask for something, but it doesn't actually give them what they're asking for. So they still have to use their mind and their language to figure out and communicate what they're actually looking for. Timers are the last visual that we're going to talk about today. You're going to see a lot of timers for our students here at Elam. This is particularly helpful when students have a hard time leaving preferred tasks or when students are having a hard time during a non-preferred task. So students might have a hard time leaving recess, just for an example. And we might set a timer saying, okay, 1 more minute until recess is done, then we're going to go to the next activity. Or, 2 more minutes of work, then we get our favorite toy. So it's just another way of helping our students visualize what the expectation is. So sign language is another thing that we're going to discuss. While sign language can be helpful in specific situations, we tend to look at sign language a little bit differently here at Elam. A lot of our students who do know some signs, it might be particularly helpful here at Elam, and there are some universal ones that we use here. We always err on the side of caution with sign language and teaching our kiddo sign language because we always think that if our students ever get lost in public or ever get out of the house or are at a hospital and they're trying to communicate their wants and needs, whether it's the bathroom or they're hungry or thirsty or something hurts, not everyone is going to know sign language. So we want to really push the fact that we want to use a universal language, which we tend to use the visuals, the icons, the communication books, the dedicated devices, the iPads, because we want the students to generalize their language to access their wants and needs. So the Elam basics of sign language that we're going to go over now is actually, you're going to see these signs quite often, but these are not the primary mode of communication for our students here. So if you want to say yes, you're going to make a fist. You're going to rock it forward. If you want to say no, you're going to take your 2 fingers and your thumb on the bottom and pinch your fingers, almost like a duck. So for sit and stand, for sit, you're going to take both hands and put 2 of your index fingers together. You're going to drape the 2 over like 2 legs sitting on a chair. For stand, you're going to take your 1 palm and set it flat. And then you're going to take your other hand and make 2 little legs and stand it on top of your flat palm. For more, you're going to almost make puppets with your hands. You're going to face them towards each other, and you're going to hit your nails together. Say more. All done is also both hands. You're going to face your nails towards each other, and you're going to drape your hands outward, like you're clearing the table with your hands. To say bathroom, you're going to stick your thumb between your first 2 fingers. For help, Again, we're going to open our palm. We're going to put our fist on top of our palm with our thumb on top. And we're going to raise both hands up at the same time. If you want to say eating, you're going to pretend like you're feeding yourself, again with that pinched hand, almost like a duck, and feed yourself. Same with drink, you're just drinking from a cup. To say stop, you're going to do a karate chop right on top of your flat palm. And to ask for a break, just pretend like you are breaking a stick. So now we're going to talk about facilitating communication. We really want to remember to keep communication simple, repetitive, and consistent. This is how our students are really going to take away what we're teaching them, and this is how they're going to be able to communicate independently. Remember not to overtalk, overwhelm, or overcue. It's really easy to fall into a habit where we are doing hands-on, hand-over-hand communication with our student. A lot of times there's an expectation going into a speech session or speech group where a staff member wants to take the student's hand and give the exact answer that the speech path or that the teacher is looking for. And that's not necessarily what we want to do, because that's teaching our students that their teacher is going to communicate exactly what they need and exactly what they want at all times. And that's not how life is going to go. So we want to make sure that if they don't need that hand-over-hand assistance, then we're just going to model for them. And maybe we'll just give them some time. We're going to remember to use visuals rather than verbal cues, because remember, the verbal cues are going to set back that processing time. And we're going to keep adult speech to a minimum. Like I said before, some of our students really surprise us. We've had kiddos who have been nonverbal coming into our school, and now they're chatting up a storm after a communication device, after just verbal modeling. And we don't want any of our students to go home talking about their teacher's weekend. So we're going to keep all of that to ourselves and find other times to talk about our personal lives. We want to remember to respond to communication intent and not the action. So just like I said, if a student is grabbing their water bottle or reaching for a specific toy, we want to acknowledge the fact that they're trying to communicate with us, and we can communicate or model on their device exactly what they need. And if it's not the right time for that, that's okay. We're still going to respond to them and say, oh, it really looks like you're thirsty, or it really looks like you're hungry, but lunch is in 30 minutes. So we're going to respond to the communication intent, but we might not always follow through with the action. And we also want to remember to give the student time to respond. Like I said, communication processing, it might take 10 to 13 seconds with our students, and we want to make sure that we give them the opportunity to be able to understand what we're saying or asking and give them time to respond, because our students have a lot to say. We want to provide the opportunity for communication in all school environments and in the community. This is so important just based on how much we talk in our everyday lives. Just because the student is going to the pool or going to recess or going into the community, they need their voice with them at all times. Even if they're at recess, there might be a time where they really need to use the bathroom, or something really hurts them, or a bee stung them. If they don't have their device out there at recess or on community, we're not going to know what they're trying to communicate with us, and most likely that's going to turn into a behavioral crisis situation. We want to always check to see if the student has what they need to communicate. A lot of times our students will not independently get their communication devices out of their backpacks, and if they do, which a lot of our students are able to do that, maybe they're not going to power it on themselves. So in the mornings, throughout the day, we really want to make sure that the device is out of their backpack or the communication book. We want to make sure it's powered on, and we want to make sure that it doesn't need charged. We also want to encourage communication with a variety of people. So a lot of times in the community, we will go out for ice cream or a snack, or we'll go to the park. And if somebody says hi, I think naturally we want to say hi for our students. But that's a really good opportunity to allow the student to use their communication device. And it ends up being a teaching moment for both the individual in the community and our student. A lot of times we'll go out in the community and we'll order ice cream or a snack. And the cashier may ask you, oh, what did they say that they want? Well, that's another learning opportunity where they should be directing their communication to our student, so then you can have the student respond or repeat what they had ordered. We also want to avoid becoming the student's interpreter, because every moment is a teachable moment with communication. I know I had a really hard time with this in the classroom, and especially after you're working with students for so long, you know them like your own child. You know the favorite snack, you know the favorite drink, and their favorite toy. But we don't want to be the student's interpreter. And just like the Carly's Cafe video, maybe one day our students are going to wake up and not want the same snack that they have eaten for the past 2 years. Maybe they want something different. Maybe they had a different experience and they want to try something new. Or maybe their sibling had shared a snack with them and now that's their favorite. So although we feel like we know our students in and out, like the back of our hands, like the back of our own students, we want to give them, that opportunity to voice their own opinion and select something that they want.